So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's program with author Margo McMillan, author of The Golden Lane. And we're going to be talking about the fight for women's suffrage in Missouri. My name is Lauren Williams, and I'm Adult and Community Services Manager for the Columbia Public Library, which is part of the Daniel Boone Regional Library System. As you know, this is Women's History Month, and then we just spent a year celebrating 100 years of women's suffrage. So it seems like a good time to learn about how a protest at the 1916 Democratic National Convention in St. Louis helped make voting rights a reality for women. This afternoon, we have with us Margo McMillan. Very pleased that she has joined us. She's written at least 6 books and numerous articles about Missouri issues, heritage, women, conservation, and history. And besides writing and teaching, she's a farmer and raises food for Missouri restaurants and stores. She also co-hosts Farm and Fiddle on the radio station KOPN. And that's a program that explores and celebrates life on the farm and small towns in mid-Missouri with guests from our rural area, as well as all over the world. She lives with her husband, Dr. Howard White Marshall, in Callaway County. So thank you all for being here, and I will now turn things over to Margo.
Thank you, Lauren. I really appreciate what you guys are doing over at the library and in these crazy times. And I really appreciate getting a chance to talk about suffrage and about the importance of the women's struggle to get the vote. You wouldn't think it would take 150 years or, even more than that. I'm going to go to a PowerPoint. So I'm going to share the screen here and we'll get started. Okay. This is a cover of the book, The Golden Lane, that I wrote. It's out History Press, and I know the library has copies. And I just wanted to talk about the pictures on the front of the cover because they have Columbia significance as well as significance in Missouri. The top is the Golden Lane, and that is a picture that if anybody remembers at the State Historical Society, there was a woman who took care of the archives named Fay Sothem, and she was just brilliant. She knew where everything was in that huge, massive amount of photographs that they've accumulated. She retired several years ago. And I was writing an article about women in Missouri, and I had lots of pictures of women, canning and with their families and that kind of thing, and some significant women that, that were going to go into the article. And I just said to Faye, I just want something different. There's got to be something different that I don't know yet. And she tossed that photograph, that very photograph, out in front of me. And I saw these women lined up along a city street with their parasols and their long dresses. And I was just stunned. I had no idea what it was, and I couldn't understand why I had never seen it. I had been working in Missouri history a good long time at that point. And she said, "It's the Golden Lane." What? What's the Golden Lane? And she said, that's the women's demonstration at the Democratic Convention in 1916. And I just couldn't believe that we didn't know about this. This picture should be in every history book in the United States, whether it's Missouri or any other history. This is such a significant event. And of course, it was just all but forgotten. So they're lined up along Locust Street. I can read a little bit from the book. I think we have time for me to do that, and it'll just kind of get us all on the same page. It was June 14th, 1916, a warm, sticky Wednesday morning. The Democratic Convention would soon meet in St. Louis at the Coliseum, the world's largest convention center. Inside the Jefferson Hotel, the men ate breakfast and met with their committees. Perhaps they chatted about the war in Europe, noted that Woodrow Wilson had the election locked up, or remarked that the bread was darn fresh. The freshness of the bread might have led to praise for the city with its modern lights, purified water, skyscrapers, an electric streetcar system. Delegates might even have expressed surprise comparing St. Louis to cities on the East Coast, the West Coast, and of course, Chicago. The comings and goings of delegates and spectators added to the traffic, noise, and bustle of the city street. Aromas from the restaurants, automobiles, horses, harness, coal smoke from the electric plant gave the place a distinctive gritty odor. Now, outside the hotel, thousands of women quietly took their places on the sidewalk. By 10 o'clock in the morning, they were lined up for blocks along both sides of Locust Street, shoulder to shoulder, each in a dress that brushed the pavement, shading herself with a yellow parasol and wearing a yellow sash that read, "Votes for Women." The Golden Lane spread for a mile on both sides of Locust Street, forming a peaceful, walkless, talkless parade with women from all over the nation. The message was clear. We have made every reasonable argument time and again to prove that we carry the burdens of modern life just as men do, and we are capable of voting responsibly. Still, our pleas are rebuffed, ignored, and met with insults. Our parades are blocked by ruffians. Some demonstrations become violent, and it is the women who are jailed. This public demonstration by women in the city was daring, even shocking. St. Louis was riddled with divisions between ethnic groups, racial groups, Southern and Northern US traditions, and a political machine controlled by the beer brewing industry. 2 years earlier, the suffragist petition drive had been rudely scorned by the state legislature. Suffragists risked censure and exclusion from all sides, so they pursued the goal of voting in modest, ladylike tones. Although the organizers had prepared for months and the Golden Lane was no secret, the reality of women standing silent on a downtown street had an astonishing impact. One of my friends who studies nonviolent demonstrations says that this may have been the first nonviolent demonstration. It definitely precedes Gandhi, it precedes Martin Luther King. So it may be that somebody, maybe one of you that's listening right now could do some deep study on the subject and find out if this is in fact the very first silent, nonviolent demonstration. And then in the bottom picture, just to mention it, Kate Richards O'Hare was a socialist, and she was a pacifist actually. And she was lecturing to a group of men. You can see those hats, the sea of hats in front of her. They're all men. She's standing on the back of a car, and she is demonstrating for suffrage in this picture. And a few months after the picture was taken, she was jailed in the Jefferson City Penitentiary, right down the road here in Cole County. Sometimes people just take voting for granted. And I put this slide in just so that we can remember that voting in and of itself maybe isn't the whole point, but getting a stepping stone to greater participation in the larger society is what was important. And of course, in 2020, we had women running for office. How amazing. And you might have woken up this morning to hear the news that the legislature, the House of Representatives in Washington has changed the law so that the Equal Rights Amendment can be brought forward again. It had kind of elapsed, the time to ratify it had kind of elapsed. And I wanted to put this slide in because a lot of people don't know what the Equal Rights Amendment says, and you can see it's not very long here. Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. That's basically what it says. And then the rest of it just says that Congress can enforce it, and that the amendment would take place 2 years after the date of ratification. Lest you think that that we have the ERA now. We don't. We just have a pathway to ratify the ERA in the Constitution of the United States. It's kind of embarrassing, I think, that we don't have this in the Constitution, but something to work on. I always like to talk a little bit about the I guess you could call it the theory or the philosophy of the right spheres of men and women. And this was written about a lot. If you've ever heard of Wolfgang Goethe, he was a very famous philosopher, and he wrote a lot about the natural spheres of men and women. And he was published over and over again in women's magazines to justify their status in the home, and also in things that men read that were more about giving them permission to have domination in the other spheres, the political and the material, manufacturing. True women, he had true women and true men. True women were in charge of the home. And interestingly enough, that included health of people. It included food, it included clothing. It was a very important position. And if you read some of the early suffragists, you'll see them writing about how men stole their jobs, because as the industrial age became more powerful, there were more products made by men in manufacturing, cake mixes and canned soups and clothing that you could buy off the rack. I don't think any of us would dispute that that was a huge burden taken off of women, but it also removed their sources of power. So what did a woman risk if she protested that system and if she was outside the domestic sphere? This picture up in the right-hand corner shows a woman and a little girl, and I have 2 daughters, and when I see this picture, I think of my kids and of myself, that if we were alive at that time and did not have a man to support us, could be beggars. These folks had a music box, and so they're sitting in front of a store and they're playing music and, you know, hoping someone will drop a little money into their box. What she could risk if she was outside of the domestic sphere, she could certainly have an angry husband. He would be embarrassed, perhaps, that she was outside of, she was agitating. The community could accuse her of neglect. She could actually lose her home and her children. And I think a lot of people have heard and know that Mark Twain was in an apprenticeship when he was a young man. When he was about 12, he was put into apprenticeship with a printer. But they don't really realize why that happened. And it happened because his mother was widowed. So she had really no way to support the family, and she had 3 children that she had to figure out what she could do with them. Her story turned out more happily than some, but if she had not had male relatives who were prosperous, she would have possibly been out on the street like this woman in this picture from St. Louis. You know, you could be rejected from the other women in your family. They might not understand why a young woman was demonstrating for her rights. Independence was threatening to the family, and the neighbors could say that the family raised a willful daughter. You might lose your peers, your friends, and your church members. They might withhold support and shun the young woman, leaving her alone. She could be diagnosed with uteromania, which is a madness that psychiatrists said caused women to think they had a grand mission in life. If diagnosed, a woman might spend her life in a mental institution or be operated on for a tipped uterus. I had never heard of uteromania until I wrote a book about the Fulton State Hospital. And indeed, there were women at the Fulton State Hospital who were diagnosed with uteromania and operated on for the tipped uterus. This is a Woman's Sphere cartoon, and the cartoonist says that a woman devotes her time to gossip and clothes because she has nothing else to talk about. Give her broader interests and she will cease to be vain and frivolous. So on the top, she's peeking over the fence that says Woman's Sphere on it. And in the bottom, she's actually casting a vote. The Civil War was one of the impetuses, I guess, for women asking for the vote. This is when some of the earliest arguments came about. When the war broke out, men, of course, went off to battle, and they were building battleships and guns and learning how to march and that kind of thing. And women were really left to care for civil society. So women ended up organizing the hospitals. They ended up providing food. They simply had all of the jobs of normal society to take care of. And at the same time, this is a picture from Harper's showing a family coming in from the countryside, and folks were pouring into the countryside to get away from the battles and to also find their loved ones. You know, maybe this family had a son that joined one of the military groups. They might not have a clue where he was. The only way you could find out was by coming into the city. Women were finding jobs for these displaced folks. They were finding them housing, and they were comforting them. There was a group in St. Louis called the Ladies Union Aid Society, and this was founded to help wounded Union soldiers and their family. They also worked with Confederates, and they also worked with the larger society as a whole. And it's important to realize that organizations like this were happening up and down the river for sure, because the Mississippi River was sort of the western boundary, a western boundary. And at the same time, they were happening in the East Coast. They were all over the United States. I just happened to have time to look through some of the archives in the Library of Congress and found one picture after another. Here's one right here of women during the Civil War taking care of the wounded. This is, I guess, in a hospital, an Army hospital. It looks like there's a tent behind them. This is one of a series of envelopes, which was at the Library of Congress. I had no idea that they actually made printed envelopes with women caring for Civil War wounded. The caption is, "Lovely woman, we will take care of the brave soldiers who have fought our battles." This is a cemetery at Jefferson Barracks. It's in St. Louis. It's easy for us to get to and check it out. This is where, of course, the folks that didn't make it during the Civil War ended up. Virginia Minor of St. Louis actually brought strategy to the suffrage movement in the United States. She and her husband, Francis, who really had to do the heavy lifting on this lawsuit, they argued that the women had played a big part in winning the Civil War for the Union. And they took their argument all the way to the Supreme Court. Now, Virginia couldn't speak in court because she was a woman, but Francis made the case and wrote it all up. They did not win. They were rejected. The Supreme Court said, well, yes, women are citizens, but being a citizen doesn't mean that you have the right to vote. So they're not that kind of citizen. They're citizens if they somehow own property and they can pay taxes on it, then you could be a citizen. In 2014, there was a bust of Virginia Minor installed in the Missouri Capitol, and Mary Mosley, who maybe some of you remember, raised $10,000 almost by herself to pay for that bust. And she found a woman sculptor who created it, and it's on the second floor rotunda. And next time you're in the Capitol, you should go visit it and, you know, just bow to it, say thank you. So after they lost their Supreme Court case in 1875, they didn't lose any time really in starting another organization, and the women's suffrage organization called the St. Louis Women's Suffrage Organization was the first organization in the United States that was 100% focused on winning the vote. They didn't talk about education. They didn't talk about prohibition. All of those other issues, what they had found through the years was that would muddy the waters. So they only focused on suffrage. And this model that was started in St. Louis became the model for the larger national organizations that focused on suffrage. Things were really changing after the Civil War, and women, one of the things that happened was that the bicycle was invented and became popular, and women were suddenly mobile. We were able to ride around and see our friends before, you know, basically we would be at home and maybe see somebody on Sunday at church. But the bicycle really changed everything. And at the same time, the streetcars, the cheap transportation that took men into the cities early in the morning and brought them home at night, realized that they had all these empty cars that they could use if they could carry women back and forth into the city to shop. So we sort of, with the industrial age, we became more focused on consumerism, and it you know, kind of all worked together. A couple of women toured the country to promote the idea of women's clubs. And this is a cover from Puck, which is a popular magazine, about the cover, the title is "At the Woman's Club." And one of the ladies is saying, "I had a row with my husband after the show last night." The other one says, "What about?" And the first one says, "He tried to calm me down for going out between acts to see another woman." And of course, you know, the joke is, before maybe he would have been really mad because she went out between the acts to see another man, but now she has friends, and so she's ducking out during intermission and confabbing with her pals. It was new. It was new. The idea of women's friendship was something that hadn't been seen too much before. Women would have, you know, friendships with their relatives, but not with folks that they had met at some kind of a meeting. What were they doing at these meetings? Well, one of the things that women's clubs always have done is sing. And so this is a book of suffrage songs. We could do a whole program on suffrage music. There are, and this is another fun thing to do if you're, you know, messing around on the internet and you want to go to the Library of Congress website. There is lots of sheet music that was written, some of it by women, a lot of it by women actually, to inspire folks at the women's clubs. If you're a member of any of these women's clubs, you might remember that a few years ago, so many of them had their 100th anniversary, and it's because they were all formed around this same time. Here's a couple of pieces of sheet music, the Bloomer Brigade March. And she's good enough to be your baby's mother, and she's good enough to vote with you. Written by two men, which is kind of interesting. But I guess the point is that along with the idea of club membership and friendship, women were starting to have fun with the idea of working for the vote. It wasn't just, they weren't just slogging through it the way that they had been earlier, trying to build their arguments, trying to figure out the language that they could use. Now it's kind of moved to a fun place. And I think that the men were picking up on that too, that they realized that, you know, this is just kind of ridiculous. And it makes me hope that that'll be a model for the other ways that social change go, that eventually we get to a place where we just all look at each other and shrug and say, what, why not? This is just silly. This is a cartoon by, this is, you know, the newspapers were, they all had cartoonists. This was sort of a golden age of newspaper art. And in this cartoon, this lady is saying, "Are you for suffrage?" And the man has his hat behind his back. "Well, I am and I ain't." And the caption is "sidestepping." Another cartoon here. This is a cartoon that was created after the Ladies' Home Journal ran an article by Grover Cleveland, of course, who, you know, was a very important politician, president for a while. He wrote an article called "Woman's Mission and Women's Clubs." And here's a quote from his article. "Let it be here distinctly understood that no sensible man has fears of injury to the country on account of such participation. It is its dangerous undermining effect on the characters of the wives and mothers of our land that we fear." So, you know, voicing his worry that these women getting together are going to build some kind of power. And there's Susan B. Anthony chasing him with an umbrella. The book under his arm is called What I Know About Women's Clubs is the name of the book. So you may have heard of the New Woman that was more or less born in 1900. Suddenly women were becoming much more aware that they could work together and that they could have an effect. So they were starting to really work and make public demonstrations. There were lots of small parades organized in Missouri and in every other state. This picture, if you can see it, it's the suffrage march line in one of the parades at the Capitol. There were a couple at the Capitol and one in New York City. And these were massive, massive marches and very organized. They weren't just get together and march like we have now. These were very organized groups. It was started, this particular parade had Inez Milholland at the front, and everybody should go run and look up Inez Milholland because she was very glamorous, very important debutante. And she was always at the front of these parades. And then there were the dignitaries, the folks who were the most important in the clubs. And then it went on from there. The clubs, Milholland sort of took her image from the Joan of Arc, the book that was written by Mark Twain. Now here you can see the Mark Twain book on the bottom right, and you can see she's astride on the horse and she has a banner of some kind that she's carrying. This is from the cover of the book. They use the same kind of image on their official program for the women's suffrage procession. And I think it's really interesting that Joan of Arc sort of had a ascending star at this time. And of course, Mark Twain was one of the folks who launched that. These are the Missouri women in the ladies military band from Maryville, Missouri. And this was the only ladies band in the United States. They had trumpets, they had tubas, they had all of the brass that any other military band would have. Mostly teachers, mostly single women. And they just made a sensation in the marches. They would go to, this one was in Washington, D.C. During the march in Washington, D.C., there were ruffians who tried to break the march up. And the bottom slide, the bottom black and white picture shows these guys coming, and they were going to, they were actually attacking Inez Milholland on her horse. And the ladies band started playing, and as one of them reminisced, played their whole entire repertoire. And that gave time for the military to come, and they chased the ruffians off, and the band and the march was able to proceed. We're starting to get ready for these political conventions in 1916. This is the marching costume for the Republican convention in Chicago. You can see it's very modern. She has on actual pants and a long dress, of course, a long jacket. But Carrie Chapman Catt, who was probably the most important leader at that time, said that the outfit was much too liberal for Southern Democrats in St. Louis. So she said that they couldn't, maybe they shouldn't march. She was just kind of feeling, trying to find an alternative to marching in St. Louis. And one of the St. Louis women actually came up with the idea of, or one of the Missouri women, she wasn't from St. Louis, came up with the idea of the Golden Lane. This is what they were doing in Chicago during the Republican convention. And I love these two elephants with their suffrage plank, carrying the suffrage plank. So in St. Louis, they started organizing for the Golden Lane. They got themselves a donkey. His name was Democratic Plank, and has a nice ring, doesn't it? They found a donkey. The newspapers really picked up on this, and this newspaper from the St. Louis Star, unfortunately out of business, covered the search of the donkey extensively. And they found a donkey in Illinois, a suitable donkey to stand in front of their office, but they couldn't get him to go across the Eads Bridge. So I'm a donkey owner. No, you couldn't. My donkeys would not cross the Eads Bridge. So they finally found a donkey in Missouri. The paper made a big deal out of christening this donkey and gave this donkey lots of publicity. And if you've ever heard a donkey bray, you know that the donkey was loud, and it was standing in front of their office as they were organizing and finding housing for people, finding food for people who came in from out of town. They had tried to have women from all parts of the United States. I'm sad to say that we don't have a record of all of the names of the women who came to the Golden Lane. I've suggested to people, and I'll just suggest it to you, if you want to find out who from your town went, they were very good about running newspaper ads after the Golden Lane, or running press releases, so that the paper would often put it in and say, a list of the women who had been to St. Louis for the Golden Lane. But nobody kept a complete record of it, so we don't know where they all came from. This is a magazine. I just love to get a picture of it in. This was edited by Emily Newell Blair. It's the Missouri Woman, and it's a sensational magazine. This is something you can look for when you go to the State Historical Society. They have a complete record of it, and it has recipes, it has stories about the PTA. It has stories about women's clubs. It has stories about women's rights, and women did have rights at the time. There were some bills that had already been passed, not voting, but other rights. And it's a fun read. We all would have subscribed to it. Everybody in our, in our community would have subscribed. Here's some more of the covers. I just love these covers. So as June 14th approached, the merchants got on board. Sticks, Bear, and Fuller started running ads for the correct kind of parasol and the correct clothing. Women like to fit in, so we wanted to be sure we had the right clothes. And I think the merchants, I think that was one of the things that kind of pushed some merchants in the direction of suffrage. They began to realize, hey, if women have more power, they can spend more money. It's one of the magazine articles, or one of the ads that they ran, wanted 10,000 woman recruits. We have to remember that we were on the cusp of World War I at this point, and they picked up on a military theme here, even though in St. Louis especially, the suffragists were mostly or quite frequently pacifists, wanted to stay out of the war. So this is my favorite picture of the Golden Lane, because I guess I like it because it's kind of from the man's point of view. This was from the archive of Carrie Chapman Catt, which is at Bryn Mawr College. And you can see the men, and they're kind of, they're kind of looking at the women. Their body language makes me think that they're, kind of getting used to the idea. I don't know how long they had walked when they got to this point of seeing the women lined up. But if you can see some of the women a little closely, they're kind of nodding, and I feel like there's a little bit of flirtation going on. I think that they're starting to kind of enjoy themselves. And certainly the newspaper articles of folks who went to the Golden Lane said that they started out very nervous, very anxious, and then somebody would smile at them and they would start to relax. And as the morning went on, they started to kind of enjoy themselves and enjoy the fact that they were actually standing up for their rights. So the question is, have women changed the world? And, the answer is probably yes. Women's turnout rate has exceeded men's in every midterm election since 1986 and in every presidential election since 1980. In 2008, 64% of eligible voters turned out. In 2012, 57.5%. In 2016, 58.1%. 53% of the voters in 2012 were women. We don't have complete records on any election at this point. It's funny that each statistician collects their own little group of what they think is important. But one thing that's important is that more education means more voting, and that women are staying in school much longer and are accumulating more education. So there may be even more female influence in the future, as more women now than men are getting advanced degrees. Unmarried women is a really interesting voting bloc. They made up 26% of registered voters, which is, I think, staggering. And that number is on the increase, but they don't go to the polls as frequently as married women. So I would love to hear if people have comments. This picture here is the Golden Lane reenactment that took place in St. Louis in 2016. And It was a great day. A lot of people came out, and there was a big presentation of organizations and groups talking about the Golden Lane down in St. Louis, not on Locust Street, in one of the parks. But Locust Street, if you go to Locust Street, it still looks pretty much like it did. I think they could make a movie right now of the Golden Lane and have Locust Street the same. The buildings mostly date back to that time.
All right, so if you have any comments or want to share a story or anything else, you can type those in the chat for Margo, or you can also click that raise hand button, and I can allow you to speak button, and you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Just a quick ask you to restate about how many women do they, I saw several thousand, how many women do they think were there at along the Golden Lane?
You know, that is a very good question, Lauren. And they were trying to get 5,000. I think they ended up at about 2,000.
Okay.
I don't know if I have, I do. I can find some comments from the day after, I think, if I get lucky and turn to the right page. Yeah, here, the media responding. Let's see if they have an estimate. So this is a little piece from Emily Newell Blair. For 6 hours, we stood along the sidewalk, blocks and blocks of us, women from the tenements and some from New York mansions, teachers and housewives, factory workers and factory owners. The delegates and visitors joked us as they took to the streets and marched between us to the convention, some uncomfortable, some annoyed, and some nodding approval, according to their opinions on the subject. Here's what the Post-Dispatch said. Rows of beautiful she-rose. I know, I didn't know that that was a word they would have used in 1916.
That seems very contemporary.
Doesn't it? Rows of beautiful she-rose, miles long, on both sides of the street, silently and eloquently bespeak the distinguished consideration of democracy and mankind. Time was ages and ages ago when the situation on the Golden Lane was precisely reversed. The matriarchy, instead of the democracy of males, ruled the world. Woman was possessor of high estate, man of the low. Woman was center and head of the domestic group, pivot of the social system, boss of politics, and leader of the military. Woman was boss of the earth, and the deity was female. She answered prayers, declared war, led armies, and did the voting exclusively. Men did the housework and yearned for political rights. How the mighty have fallen, the menial uplifted. Perhaps woman overdid the overbearing. Man has treated her vengefully once he wrested control of politics from her. It seems high time to relent and let her vote again. She mutely asks democracy to throw her a plank in the political sea. She asks, why shouldn't a female individual have equal rights in a democracy, in a representative government founded upon the consent of the governed? Devotees of liberty and equality, look her in the face and tell her why.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, he was on our side.
Yeah, I would say. We do have a question from an attendee. She writes, you mentioned local newspapers might have records of attendees from their areas. Have you researched whether anyone might have attended from Callaway County?
You know, I did look in the Callaway County, in the Fulton Sun, what was it called, the Fulton Sun? Anyway, the newspaper, which, by the way, the Historical Society has a very good record of that paper. I did not see anything. The what papers did I see it in? The California paper, the Jefferson City paper. If you go to look about 2 days or 3 days after the date, which is June 14th, 1916. So you would look, from about the 15th to the 20th, let's say. That's about when they will get in there. But I have not seen it in the Callaway County paper, I'm sad to say.
So I thought it was interesting you talked about the risks, the very real risks of women speaking up and speaking out and leaving their homes. I did put in the chat a couple of links to a couple of books about the bicycle. There's one for youth called Wheels of Change, about the bicycle in women's history. And there's another one for adults called Revolutions, How Women Change the World on Two Wheels. That if people are interested in that, I found that particular comment very fascinating and remembered seeing those books on our shelves. So that's something to check out. Also, if people want to purchase your book, where is it available to purchase?
Oh, well, I have copies, so people could get a hold of me. The pandemic, so last March, I had all sorts of presentations lined up, and guess what? They were all canceled. So, so I do have quite a few books, but I think that the State Historical Society still has them, and you see them online. The History Press still has it available.
Another thing that came to mind when you were talking about the merchants kind of getting on board and selling the right color umbrellas and the correct costumes or the correct outfits, that makes me think of some of what we're seeing today. Suddenly at Target or at JCPenney, you see Black History Month clothing, or or even Black Lives Matter clothing, and so it's become very mainstream. And so part of me gets kind of cynical about, well, they just want to make money off of this, and I'm sure those merchants wanted to make money off of this movement, but I don't know if it indicates a kind of tipping point in a social movement. I don't know, but I just thought that was interesting to hear that the merchants got on board in supplying the correct outfits.
I think that is a tipping point. I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I haven't been to those stores for a while. But yeah, I think that does indicate that they're willing to take a step in that direction, that it's not quite as scary as it was. Let's hope that that's one of the signs that says that something is being accepted, something positive is being accepted.
The other thing that you mentioned that I wanted to hear more about is the fact that the women who are at the Golden Lane came from those diverse socioeconomic backgrounds. And I know, now we have Facebook and digital ways that we can communicate and not easily, but spread the word about a cause. And so I'm just interested to hear how did society women or people who were part of these organizations recruit women from tenements and from factories? How did they recruit people from all walks of life to be a part of this?
They had a lot of speaker bureaus where women from the certain, in St. Louis, there's a very prominent club called the Wednesday Club, Women's Club, still organized. A lot of the women's clubs in prominent or prosperous places had their own buildings. And so the Wednesday Club still has a building. It's real interesting to me that it's only used on Wednesdays. I don't know. It's a gorgeous building. But these women sort of took it upon themselves to go and speak to people in other groups. I was surprised that the women from the Wednesday Club went to talk to African American clubs in St. Louis, and felt that was really important, that they needed to get as many people as they could out to to the Golden Lane and to other discussion groups and such that they were having, that they were hosting.
Were there Black women part of the Golden Lane?
Maybe a few. There's one group that has said that she thinks that some family members were in it. I haven't seen any pictures with it, and like I said, the complete list is gone. I should make a special thank you to people who have done genealogy and have included their female relatives in that, because it is really hard to research women. We change our names, we move, we don't leave forwarding addresses. And it's different than doing the genealogy with men. It's really challenging to try to figure out who was where and when they were there.
Okay. Right. Does anyone else have any items for discussion? If you want to type those in the chat. So we've got just a few more minutes. I had no idea that St. Louis was such a kind of on the forefront of developing the women's organizations, and it makes me kind of proud to be a Missourian. That's pretty great.
Lauren, one of the things that's really interesting about St. Louis is because it's in the middle of the country, it was really important in publishing. And a lot of magazines came out of St. Louis because you could ship in both directions from St. Louis. You could go west and east with your newspapers or magazines or whatever it was. Kate Richards O'Hare was the editor of a socialist magazine in St. Louis called the National Ripsaw, which, if I ever get reincarnated to be a newspaper owner, it's going to be called the National Ripsaw. I love that.
It's a wonderful, wonderful name.
Isn't it a great name? So, a lot of women's magazines came out of St. Louis. In fact, I won't be able to think of the name of the suburb, but one of the suburbs was founded by a women's newspaper, successful publisher of women's newspapers, who I wish I could remember what town it was, because we should all go to that town and go to their city hall, because it's all full of pictures of women and statues of women, and it's real interesting. I'll see if it's in here. I know it's in here, I just don't know where it is. Well, I know. These days we kind of think of St. Louis as, oh well, but man, it was very significant.
And I hope it will be again. I hope it will rise like a phoenix from the ashes, maybe.
Why not?
Yeah.
Why not?
While you're looking for that, I just put in the chat the link to our website, where you can find more upcoming library events. Also, this dbrl.org/events is the kind of landing page for past events as well. There's a button there that will take you to our YouTube channel to see recordings of past events. And that's where, in a few days, once our PR department has done their magic to clean up audio and stuff on this recording, that's where this recording will appear.
Well, I should have remembered this. It was University City.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So go to the University City City Hall next time you're in that area.
Excellent. Well, Margo, thank you so much. I learned quite a bit, and now I'm interested in learning more about the Golden Lane and this time in history. So thank you for sharing your research and this really fascinating story.
Thanks for having me, Lauren. It was great to see you.
Sure, and thanks everyone for attending. Have a great rest of your day.